think I'll come back to this place in front. I've grown to kind of like it a bit. Stick with it for a while. I saw this video that was made in 2007 where this violinist is playing at an entryway of this Washington, D.C. metro station, and it's just before 8 a.m. in the morning, so there's this morning rush kind of people coming in and out. And the video is at this odd angle, kind of right above a doorway that you can kind of see. And the video is just a little over 2 minutes long, and it's time-lapsed. So as it goes on, you see all these people kind of rushing by here and there, kind of in waves. And this man's violin playing is over the top of that video. And of the 1,000-plus people who passed by, 27 of them gave the man money. 7 of them stopped to watch the man play. And I bring up this particular case, and this one is notable, even though it doesn't seem like it, right? It seems like just the life of a busker, a street musician. But this is notable because that musician was Joshua Bell, who's regarded as one of the best violinists in the entire world. He was playing a violin that was worth well over $1 million at that particular show. And he played for almost, or just over 40 minutes. And during that time, he made $32 and some change. And of that $32, 20 was from one woman who recognized him, and she stayed to watch for a while. And that's her right there. In this time-lapse video, she's the one who stands out because all these crowds of people are rushing by, and you see one person just standing still. And it was like she had this personal show, this personal secret that no one else knew about. Everyone else just assumed he was some dime-a-dozen street musician. But she had seen him the night before at the Library of Congress. And this whole idea for this experiment came from this journalist named Gene Weingerin, who wrote a story about it in the Washington Post called Pearls Before Breakfast. And the kind of question behind it is, how do you know something is really, really good without the package, right? Without all that extra attention, the security, the publicity that goes along with it, because really that's how we treat things that are exceptional, right? Sometimes we aren't really cued into what is really good unless we have everything else that comes along with it. In other words, how something is framed matters, all right? And in today's gospel story, the Pharisees approached Jesus with a question. And their question is about divorce. And so what we'll see is that this looks like it's about divorce, but actually Jesus kind of opens it up to see that the context is much broader than that. And the Pharisees come with kind of a hostile intent when we look at it, right? Because they come and they test him. Now, you would ask questions for various things, right? You might recognize someone is authoritative or respected in a particular field. Or you find reason to justify maybe a previous belief that you hold. So you kind of ask a question of someone who's maybe a little bit more knowledgeable to kind of get their insight on it. But in this particular case, it looks like it's a lack of trust in Jesus' authority. So some Pharisees come to test him, and they ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Now, they knew the answer, right? And so Jesus kind of presses them on it, right? You know what does the law say? What does Moses say? Well, they said Moses allows a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her. So Jesus is saying, if lawful is the context that you're interested in, that you're concerned about, you have your answer. But his response to them, he's kind of framing the question he's framing it in saying what the question reveals about them. Right? Essentially, or here's what Jesus says to them. Because of your hardness of heart, Moses wrote that commandment for you. So essentially, he's kind of saying your question has this underlying premise. And it's as if they asked, hey, Jesus, when is the death penalty okay, right? And Jesus would respond to them, all humankind is made in God's image. If you're looking for, lawfulness, that's kind of probably the wrong question, right? Because if you're concerned about what's lawful, you're missing something really, really important here. You're missing something crucial. If you're worried about what's lawful, you're looking for the bare minimum of responsibility. What is the least that I have to do? And well, when we approach any kind of relationship or anything that way, that's not really too inspiring, is it? Think about the relationships or friendships that you are in, that you pursue, right? If someone is just looking for doing the bare minimum, well, there's not a whole lot to grab onto there, is there? We don't want to just get by. We often want to find something that's meaningful, something that's challenging, something we can give ourselves to, something that will cost us something. But Jesus is using their legalist approach to kind of appeal to this higher order of God's creation. And so it looks like it's going into this whole treatise about marriage, right? And the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. What God has joined together, let no one separate. So we could look at this whole teaching of Jesus as his perspective on divorce or just marriage, between two people. But that would be to miss the whole bigger context, right? Because what Jesus is concerned with here is he's concerned with their hardness of heart. Because it draws attention to their narrow perspective. It highlights that they're failing to see the fullness of what God desires for our relationships. And here, it's not just about marriage. Because when the hardness of heart is concerned with, when it's about that, then no matter what legal observance we have or we follow, observing the law is not going to solve that issue. It's not going to cure a hardened heart. I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis. He had a warning about a hardened heart in his book, The Four Loves. And he warns, he's kind of reflecting on the love that we're called to have. And he warns that to leave in love is to risk our hearts being run out and possibly broken. He says, if you want to keep it intact, if you want to keep your heart intact, give it to no one. Wrap it up carefully round with hobbies, with little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket of your own selfishness. Quite an imagery there, right? The casket of selfishness. But he has a warning that in doing so, if you were to do so, your heart will change, right? It will harden. It will atrophy. So even though marriage is the context of this teaching here, we can kind of see an extension of that, becoming one flesh, as a description of our human family. All right, we can see how this teaching naturally goes into marriage, but it's about more than that, because what God is joining together, that's the action that God is doing, right? God's joining together. Well, that reveals that we're relational, communal beings, communal people. So God gives us a common mission. And this one flesh that we're called into, well, that can be understood as being of one desire, having one mission, and that's carrying out God's loving work together. Now, you and I both know that life often offers up enough to harden our hearts and then some. And maybe this is the real tragedy that Jesus wants us to be aware of. That with a hardened heart, we miss out on so much of what God gives. And it's not a matter of having two camps, right? Those who have their hearts hardened and those who are the compassionate ones. Instead, just like everyone who passed by that violinist in the DC metro station. We can't conclude that life's about those who really appreciate music and those who don't. We're more likely on a spectrum, right? That there are things to which we are hardened, our hearts have become hardened to, and things that we are more open to, more likely to be compassionate in. And so for us, the question is, what direction are we moving in? Well, 7 years after Joshua Bell did that Washington, D.C. metro station experiment, he went back, and it looked a little different that time. They let people know beforehand that it was him, and guess who showed up? Well, a lot more folks, right? And I love that imagery because they wanted here to have more people to tune in to this gift that was happening. And that image and this story reminds me of that God who never gives up on us, right? That the work that Jesus is doing is tuning us into God's work among us. And for a God who extends such welcome and love, may our hearts be opened and give thanks. Amen.